In the grand theater of life, we all seek a comeback, a resurgence, a rekindling of our inner fire. But how do we spark that flame? Welcome to Reignite Resilience. This is not just another podcast. This is a journey, a venture into the heart of human spirit, the power of resilience, and the art of reigniting our passions.
Embrace dyslexia as a unique perspective, not a limitation. It's not a setback, but a different set of steps to wisdom and creativity. Welcome back to Reignite Resilience. I'm your co-host, Natalie Davis.
Hi, and I'm Pam Cass.
And we are so excited to be back, and we are talking to you about dyslexia today. And Pam, girl, you're dyslexic.
Gee, thanks, Natalie. Thanks. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Absolutely. Well, we are, of course, continuing on this journey where we are sharing adversities that we've personally overcome and providing tools and resources to everyone out there in our community. And today, we have the honor of sharing a fabulous story and experience. You're just basically, it's part of your life now in terms of your journey with dyslexia, Pam. So I'd love, can we just dive right in? Tell us a little bit about your diagnosis and when that occurred and how that appeared in your life.
Well, let me start first with how this was kind of re-brought into my life, because I think that's kind of an interesting one. I was speaking at a company and I was talking about the power of our mind and how we are able to create these beliefs. And sometimes these beliefs help us overcome things. And so I started to create this presentation, and I was thinking about my journey with dyslexia and how I was overcoming it. And it was the morning of the presentation. I was getting ready and I'm like, you know what? I think I've cured myself of dyslexia. I don't think I have it anymore. And so I was like, maybe you should research to see if you actually can cure dyslexia.
Yes.
And so I went online and the answer was no, you can't. And yet I had this belief that I no longer had dyslexia. So that led me to start thinking about my journey and what got me to where I am today. So we lived in Boston, so right outside of Boston, about 20 miles, very small town. We had town hall meetings. We didn't have a mall. We had no fast food restaurants. So very, very small town. And I struggled with school. And I just remember getting in trouble all the time for not completing work and not doing things in class that the other kids were doing. And I remember coming home one day and my teacher had called my parents. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table with my dad, almost feeling like I was in trouble and going through the homework with my dad to get it done. Finally, a teacher said something to my parents that they're like, maybe you should have her tested for a learning disability. And so I remember spending an entire day with my mom heading to Boston. And I don't remember a lot of the testing, but we went through puzzles and stuff like that. And what came out of that was my diagnosis of having dyslexia. And so
before that, did you feel that you learned differently than everyone else in your classroom?
Well, I was so young. I was in second grade, so I was 8 years old. So I don't really know what it was that was different other than I wasn't getting the work done. And it's simply because when you have dyslexia, you learn differently, you read differently. So it takes us a little bit longer to process things. I didn't have the tools yet that I needed to help me learn the way that the other kids were learning. Right. And so that was kind of what the problem was at the time that made the teacher reach out to my parents. And so because it was a small town and because it was I'm going to age myself, because it was in the 70s, there has been a ton of research on dyslexia for over 130 years, but it's only been the last 10 to 15 years that there's really been really good testing and education for people with dyslexia. I didn't have that back then. So what it meant was anytime in our class in second grade that we were going to do any reading or anything like that, all they did was take me out of class and I got to go make cookies with one of the teachers, or I think it was probably an aide. And so that's probably why I like to bake so much, because that's what I did. But here's the problem with that is every time I was removed from the classroom, I was being taken away from my peers, which made me feel different. Why was I different? And so that became incredibly isolating. And so what happened is I became very shy. I didn't have friends, and it started a really tough journey for me because I now knew that I was different. Like I was different. Something was wrong with me. I wasn't doing the same things that the other kids were doing. And that was really tough.
Yeah. I think that's a huge piece on perspective too, right? Because I think back to grade school and elementary school, and I think, gosh, well, the kids that were pulled out of class for whatever that activity was, and they always come back to the class and share whatever project they worked on, or if they baked cookies or whatever that may be. As the students that were not pulled out, let me tell you, baking cookies versus having reading time sounds much more appealing to an 8-year-old, right? So from that perspective, like your peers probably didn't see it necessarily as you, like it being a learning disability or that you learn differently. There was probably a little bit of envy though on the fact that you got to bake multiple times a week and they got to sit in for reading time.
And they had to do the work.
Whatever it was.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was when I was 10. So it was when I was in 5th grade, my dad changed jobs. And so we were brought to Colorado. And talk about tough. We came and I started school in December, middle of the year. Friend groups were already together. Here I come to this new school in a new state, no friends at all. And I am airdropped into this classroom where, again, I don't know anybody. And again, I start getting pulled out and I get to do different things from the other kids. So again, it just kept perpetuating that I'm different. I'm not good enough to be in that class with the other kids. And I just was so shy. It was almost to the point where I would have panic attacks if I had to talk in front of people or in front of the class, or God forbid, if I had to read in front of the class. And so again, it just was this incredibly isolating thing. And I know we're going to talk on our next episode about shame and dyslexia. There's a bit of shame with it. Like you're ashamed of having dyslexia. And that might be part of why I never had shared that I had dyslexia as an adult in my career. Nobody ever knew about it. It wasn't until I did that presentation and shared that with 100 people that, oh, hey, by the way, I have dyslexia and I've overcome it and I'm successful. That was when things kind of changed.
Well, and we do that with so many areas of our life, right? Like we tuck things away, and maybe not so much with the millennial generation and moving forward. So like I would say millennials I don't know where they gained this skill set, but they have this great knack for truly like facing things head on. Like if there's a challenge or something that really goes against their grain, they're going to address it in that moment versus our generation. It was more of let's sweep it under the rug and never talk about it. Right. So, and that's kind of how a lot of us learn to cope with things that were uncomfortable for us. Right. So for you, with working through dyslexia and your diagnosis at that point, because now you know, right? Not only were maybe you had struggles or challenges with keeping up with the pace of work or turning things in on time, things of that nature. Now you actually sat down and you have this diagnosis that you're moving through life with. And instead of, and again, because of limited access to resources or even resources that were available, you just said, okay, I'm going to push this to the side and maybe I have cured myself, right? Maybe it doesn't exist anymore until you realize, yes, it does. It is still there. It's still there. You're working through. You've just learned to work through that. And so you've had people in your life from coaches and tutors that have helped you in kind of giving you the tools that you've needed to help in navigating your day-to-day with dyslexia. Tell us about some of those people that have had an impact, have played a role.
Yeah. So probably the one that I remember that happened probably first is my dad took a Dale Carnegie public speaking class. And I think everybody has heard of Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And so he had taken this class and he signed me up to take it with him. Mind you, I was in junior high. I wasn't driving yet. I was very young. And this was in the evening. And the group of people that was in this class were business professionals who were showing up right after work in their suits. And here is this teenage girl that is as shy as can be. And oh, guess what you get to do every single week? You get to get up in front of that entire group and share life stories. I'm like, I am a teenager. I don't have a life to share. Are you crazy?
So are you kidding? Teenagers have like a whole blip of life on a daily basis. Like there's a whole saga every other day for teenage girls. I think you had things to share, maybe not to a room full of adults.
and let me tell you, the stories they were sharing were these I can't even tell you some of the deep shares that were given. I mean, the vulnerability that came out of that. And here I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to talk about how somebody was mean to me in class, and somebody is talking about the death of somebody or a divorce or the loss. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. But showing up for that, because we went every single week and it was for a period of time, that forced me to come outside of my shell and feel comfortable in my own skin talking about myself. Yeah. And so that was really a pivotal time in my life. And it's interesting. It wasn't until years and years later. So this happened when I was in junior high. When I was in college, I ended up teaching Dale Carnegie public speaking because it was kind of a full circle. And sometimes, you take a class, but until you teach it, that's when the learning really happens. And so for me, it was, I need to go back and now actually teach it and help other people. So that was one pretty big event that kind of changed the trajectory of my life. Yeah. The next one was that my parents hired a private tutor for me. And it was so interesting because in my mind, I was like, well, I can't do this. I'm different. I can't do that. I'm always in these special reading classes while everybody else is in a regular class. And this tutor, I remember showing up at her house, Mrs. Hipsch. I remember showing up and she came to the door and she had a limp and her one arm she had to hold up because she didn't have any motor skills in the one arm. And she met me at the door, walked me to the table. We sat down. We started talking a little bit and I started talking about all the things I can't do. Mm-hmm. And she stopped me and she said, I want to share a story with you. She goes, I was diagnosed with polio, or I contracted polio as a very young child. And I was told I would never walk. So in this space, we're never going to say we can't do anything. So I'm going to teach you how you can do it. And so that was a huge turning point in my life where I had this person that was going to become a champion for me. Mm-hmm. And she taught me the tools to take what I had to take dyslexia and learn the way I need to learn. So I learned probably very differently from most people. The things that I have to go through to learn something is a lot more work than probably somebody that doesn't have dyslexia. But she gave me the tools. And what was so cool is, so I was in junior high at the time, which is a tough time for any child, let alone someone has a disability. So I remember I was in ninth grade in our school, they did this big project where you could pick somewhere in Colorado, in the state of Colorado, and do a research paper on it, turn it into the principal, and the principal would pick 20 of the papers that were turned in, and those kids got to go on a week-long trip where they went and visited all of the places that the papers were written on. And then at that location, you had to present in front of your peers what it was that you wrote about. All right. Now, listening to all that as an adult, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like how on earth? So Ms. Hipsch encouraged me, write the paper. She helped me with it. She helped me through it, and mine got picked. And so here I was for the first time, I got to do something that all of these other kids got to do. Yeah. And that was a really powerful thing for me. So that was kind of that next key point in my life that kind of, again, changed the trajectory of my mindset towards having this disability.
Yeah. Well, and I just in what you've shared, Pam, like there's two phases that I've seen, right? There's the understanding and even just the awareness that the disability was something that was part of your life. So embracing that is part of who you are. And then the empowerment piece that came from it. Because even looking back at like your Dale Carnegie experience, they didn't necessarily teach you skills to help with your learning disability, but they did teach you the skills to build your confidence level. Right. Yes. So you have this confidence level that you can now carry on and understanding I am able to speak in front of a group of individuals. And later in life, I am able to teach others how to successfully offer a presentation as well. So giving you that confidence. And then another example of that is this paper that you were able to submit, right? And then have that experience with your peers, where in your mind, your experience, your world as a young person was that you've gone through life this entire time having to separate from everyone else, right? Because you were different. And so this was that pivotal moment where it's, I'm not different. I just approach things differently.
Yeah.
It's not a difference that you have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that.
And it's so interesting because back in the day, they separated you. When I went off to college, meanwhile, high school I did very well. I was always on the honor roll. I was in sports. So I was at that point very well adjusted. I still was in a special English class, but by the end, the teacher was like, you could be in a regular English class. So I had taught myself how I learn best.
Yes.
So then fast forward, I go off to college, and because of my dyslexia, I had the ability to have someone come to class with me, take notes for me, and I could take tests separate from the rest of the students and have unlimited time to take the test. So I didn't have to.
Services provided by the college. Okay.
Yes. Yep. All the services provided. Well, guess what? In my mindset, I don't need that. I can do this on my own. And I did. And so I had created this belief that I'm not different. I just learn differently. And so I was like, I don't want this stuff. And I think part of it, looking back on it, was probably a little shame. It was like, I didn't want people to think I was different. I wanted to kind of just blend in with everybody else. And if I had a note taker and was taking my tests separate, I just didn't want that. And so I was determined to work so hard that it didn't impact me at all. So yeah, it was really interesting as I am looking back and reflecting. That's what's so great about this, is thinking about things that we've gone through and then digging into it a little bit deeper and having some almost revelations as to how things impacted your life over the years. And yeah, it's been pretty powerful.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love that. Well, and I think when you are able to reach that point that you can reflect and realize that, it's not something that's happening to you, right? It truly did happen for you. Otherwise, you wouldn't have had all of these ahas and these experiences that were a result of you knowing that you're going to show up and do things a little bit differently. In looking at dyslexia and doing the research just in preparation for this and actually speaking with our next guest that's going to be on the next episode, I did not know that with individuals that have been diagnosed with dyslexia, that when you say learning differently, it truly is a different way of learning. And I had a little bit of insight to this before. I think this is before I knew that you were dyslexic, and we've done a ton of work together. So if it's content creation or even preparation for content creation, I would watch how you would prepare for presentations and just your process. And quite honestly, I was like, that gives me overwhelm. I can't do all of that. That's not working for me.
Yeah,
and so I didn't realize, I just figured that we absorb and retain information differently. But this is actually what you've taught yourself that you need to do in order to retain information and be successful in learning new things. So kind of share with us what that looks like and why absorbing and retaining information when you have dyslexia looks different. Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting because I'm starting to do a little bit of research. One of the things that came up was how we learn. And you and I have both taken tests where it identifies what your learning modality is. Yes. So a learning modality is basically different ways we learn. So one of them is being very visual. About 60% of people in the United States are visual learners. The next is the auditory learner. So we learn through hearing. And then the other one is...
I always hope to just be an auditory learner. Those people amaze me.
Those people amaze. They can listen and it's retained.
And it's done.
Yeah.
I'm not that person, for the record.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the last one is the kinesthetic learner. And the kinesthetic is that it's tactile. We have to touch it and feel it. And so when we've taken those tests, I've always had the exact same score across all three. And I was like, well, that's weird. I was like, but I didn't think anything of it. So as I'm doing the research, and it says that most people with dyslexia, they are equal on all three of those learning modalities. So when you talk about when I'm preparing for stuff, holy cow, it is, I need to see something visually, I need to hear it, and I need to be writing. If you saw how many notebooks and pieces of paper that I have, because I've got to, if I hear something and see something, I've got to write it down. If I write it down and I've done all of that, I'll remember it. And so it's so funny. So for me, reading was always a huge struggle because I read really slow. And oftentimes I'll have to reread it a few times. Mm-hmm. And so what I do now is I listen to the books. So I do Audible. I listen to the book. I have the physical book in front of me, and I'll have a highlighter, I'll have a notepad, and I'll have a pencil. And I'm taking notes. I'm doing this. Flashcards, if you could see how many flashcards I have in my world, just because that's how I learn. So it's just really interesting because this is just how I do it.
Yes.
And so it takes me longer to learn. When I'm taking a class or anything, it takes me far longer to learn it than most people that maybe it's just one learning modality. So it was just interesting because I had no idea that was a thing.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm absolutely not one. And again, I have envy for those that are just auditory learners. Just if you're out there and listening and remembering every word that we said, I envy you. Which that was me. I am totally the visual, and I have to write it down. And so that's the visual and the kinesthetic piece. So I have to see it. I have to write it down. And that then commits it to memory 95% of the time. I'm going to attribute the other 5% based off of age and how much I actually feed into my brain.
What are you talking about? We're like only in our teens. I don't know what you're saying.
That's right.
Age.
That's right. That's right.
Oh my gosh. We're vintage.
So again, could you just recap that? Like if you are reading a book or studying a curriculum, give us that, like what works best for you, because this may be something that someone out there in our community that it may work for them as well. What is that process? You have a new course that you're taking or a book that you're reading. What's your process in digesting it and retaining that? Yeah.
So let's, for example, when I teach a class for a company, and when I was very first starting to do that, I would watch a recording of one of the other instructors teaching the class. I would print off the PowerPoint presentation. And then on the PowerPoint presentation that was printed off, I would literally dictate what they said, verbiage, word for word. So I made sure I didn't miss anything. Then I will go and I will do research about those topics so that I can pull in other things. And then I will go into my memory and figure out, are there any stories from my world that correlate with this? Because that helps me remember as well, tying it to some sort of story or experience that I've had. So it's that long process that I have to do to learn and retain stuff. And then for me, it's the repetition.
Yes.
So the more I do it, the more I do it, the more I do it, it just gets easier and easier. With books, I will listen to the book, I'll have the book in front of me, and I'll have notes. And so I do kind of all the three. And oftentimes I'll have to listen to a book a couple of times if I'm needing to retain that information in such a way that I've got to present on it, or I'm doing a book club or something like that. So it's a process.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I feel like my process in terms of retaining information, it's so different, right? I am that bigger picture. What's the theme? What's the feeling? What's the emotion? Give me top bullet points. And then from there, I can work backwards to fill in the specifics, where you're like, I'm going to pull the specifics and bring myself to the bigger picture. What is the theme from there? So it's interesting because you and I will work on projects and we get to the same spot.
Yes.
Our approach to get there is always completely different.
I know. And I'm always so envious of you because you could literally have like 3 words on a sheet and then come up with a presentation. I'm like, oh girl, I got to have like notes and flashcards and examples. And it's like, people look at me. If I could show you the notebook on my floor for my mastery classes that I teach, the notebook is like this big. It's ridiculous.
And but for those that can hear, that was 6 inches. Like deep. It's 6 inches.
It's like I mean, it could be a 12-inch. I don't even know. It's
you don't know.
It's ridiculous. So
yeah, you're so right, Pam. I am totally like, I will put 6 words on a page, and I'm like, I can turn that into an hour presentation. Sure,
totally. And that stresses me out like nobody's business. So
my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's just, again, it's understanding how you best learn, right? It's not, and I think there's such a big piece. It's not fighting or trying to fix, right? You're in no way, shape, or form trying to fix yourself, even though, we started off by thinking, oh, I think I healed myself.
I cured myself. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What happened was you have figured out ways to read, write, learn that are specific to you that makes it no longer a challenge to do any of those things.
Yeah. It's just become a habit. It's just become how I learn. And it's so interesting. And with our next guest, she's going to talk more about dyslexia. We're going to kind of unpack it a little bit more. I didn't realize when we first talked to her that 1 in 5 people have some form of dyslexia. 1 in 8 people have severe dyslexia. So I don't know where I am in the spectrum, but 1 in 5 people, that's a huge amount. And it led me to think about when you and I both had kiddos that were in high school during the pandemic, when kids had to go from in-person learning to visual learning. My son struggled because he basically would sit down and it was just somebody talking. So it was strictly auditory. That's one of the smallest learning modalities. And so he struggled that year. And I know we're going to do a future episode talking about education through Zoom and visual platforms and how we can create that we are meeting people where they're at as far as what their different learning modalities are, so that we can make those experiences better for people so that they can learn from those experiences. So very
absolutely
interesting.
Well, and I think if you're even in that space right now, right? I mean, we are definitely in this new virtual world where there are still plenty of meetings that I attend on a weekly basis. They're not hybrid. They are absolutely virtual. And so if you struggle with dyslexia or even retaining information coming out of those meetings, it's okay not to have, I'm giving permission to everyone to remove that shame around a different learning style and know what works for you. I use an electronic device for all agendas if they come in prior to the meeting. I love when they come in prior to the meeting because I upload that to my device. I take notes on that device. As I'm sitting in on the meeting, I'm taking notes on the exact same paper because I need to keep everything in one spot. I am very linear in that respect. So my notes are alongside the agenda, alongside who said what when, right? So I know I can always go back and reflect on that. If you are showing up for a virtual meeting and you don't have a written agenda, or you just leave it on your screen and you're not using the kinesthetic piece of that modality for learning, and you need the kinesthetic piece, find a way to incorporate that, right? The reality is this virtual learning platform that we've found ourselves in, this new era, it's not going away. And I think it's just going to become more rapid fire as it comes to us. So be sensitive to that and give yourself grace and permission to figure out what works for you. Now, again, that's how I retain information. Outsider looking in, Pam, and I've had other people tell me, you're so organized. You keep everything in one spot. It's because I'll forget if I don't, right? It's not because I'm organized. It's just one ear out the other. If I'm just listening to you, I'm not going to remember it. I've got to write it down. And so it may appear like to the outside person that I'm an organized person. I'm not. I'm just very linear, and I have to embrace like the kinesthetic piece of learning for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I love that idea of just, I would say, try out different things. If one way is not working, try something different. And if that's not working, try multiple things and try to just figure out what is your way of learning. Because I think there are probably a lot of people out there. If 1 in 5 people have some form of dyslexia, there's probably a lot of people out there, because it is such a new thing. I think there's a lot of people that don't even realize they might have dyslexia.
Right.
And so how do we help those people and give them some resources that can help them learn better? And really, I think there's a misconception that having dyslexia means that you're not intelligent, but actually people with dyslexia have very high IQs. It's just we completely learn differently. So, I mean, I told you I graduated top 12 in my class at CSU. Now, nobody has to know that there were only 12 people in the class. That doesn't even matter. But I'm just saying. We're not going to say anything. So that's, oh, shoot, are we recording this? Darn it.
Exactly. No one knows, just the whole world. That's fine.
That's the whole world knows this. But yeah, so there's probably a lot of people, and hopefully this is starting to get you to identify maybe family members that might have dyslexia. I believe, and actually my dad believes this as well, that he probably had dyslexia because it is something that's hereditary. Mm-hmm. So if you have dyslexia, probably one of your parents had dyslexia as well. So it is something that's passed down generation for generation. So yeah, very interesting.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Well, and thank you for sharing the statistics on that because, you know, just even as you share that, I think I'm not technically diagnosed with dyslexia, but as I look at even if you look at different learning modalities and things of that nature, for whatever reason, historically, if there are any type of differences, it's seen as a weakness or that you're inferior, right? Like if it's not mainstream, the way that things were taught. Then I think about how they've changed curriculum in the schools. And for those of us that went to school decades ago, there's this thing that occurred about 10 years ago that's new math. And I thought, well, math is like the only thing that I thought was going to be the constant. And now there's new math.
New math.
Yeah. So it's okay for us to continue to evolve and learn more about ourselves and adjusting how we approach every conversation, every meeting, every opportunity that we have in life from a standpoint that doesn't make us feel inferior or even the sense of shame that we're different, but just like approaching it and understanding this is what I want to accomplish. Because not only were you top 12 in your class, you're a successful entrepreneur, you're a business coach, you've been the vice president of a company. Like these are things that if you look at dyslexia as the obstacle or the hurdle, it can totally be a challenge for you for your entire lifetime. Or you can just look at it as an opportunity to do things differently.
And I wish I had brought it with me, but I remember at one point I asked, who are famous people that have dyslexia? And the list that came up, I was like, holy cow, I had no idea. Yeah. So I think there's more people that you share that we share this with than you think. And which is why we are doing this podcast so that people realize that you're not alone on this journey. Like you said, I've had success in my life. I've had to do it a little bit differently because I have to learn differently. And I've never seen dyslexia as an obstacle. Once I got to that place where I had that tribe, that tutor, parents that were behind me that helped me through it, it no longer became an obstacle. It just became a different way of doing things. Yeah. And I think it's given me the resilience to push harder, do more, and excel. And to eventually the point where I really believed I didn't have dyslexia anymore.
Yeah, so I love it. I love that. And because of that community, right, you shared a couple of the folks that made up that community that really helped you in navigating through this. And I want to say shout out to your parents as well, because I think there's an opportunity for a sense of shame to come to the parents because we all want our children to be perfect. Newsflash, they're not. No. So in any way, shape, or form, not even just from the learning standpoint. So when you're looking at that, kudos to your parents, right? For saying, oh, well, here's what we're dealing with. Let's get a tutor. Let's figure out how we can help to empower her through this versus tucking it to the side and hoping that you grow out of it. That was also our generation. Oh, she'll grow out of it.
She'll grow out of it. She'll be just fine. Well, and it's so interesting you said that, kids aren't perfect. It's very easy to jump on social media and see your friends' kids, magna cum laude, going off to medical school and all this stuff and feeling ashamed of your child if they possibly have it and not wanting to share it. Yeah. You don't have to be ashamed of this. This is literally something. I mean, look at Richard Branson. He has dyslexia. It's something that the whole world knows, and he's very successful. So this is not a limitation. It literally is just a different way of doing things, and one that can be very powerful.
I love it. Oh my gosh, Pam, thank you for sharing your story. I think that's amazing. Hopefully our community had some ahas and takeaways. I'm really excited about our next episode. We have a special guest coming on. Do you mind sharing us? Give us a little teaser. What can we expect on the next episode?
We're going to have on an incredible woman. Her name is Joy Story, and she's actually the founder of No Code Dyslexia. So she's going to share her story. She's going to share what she's working on. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into dyslexia, how you can identify it, what some of the tools are that are available out there for children to learn differently. And so please tune in for that, because that's going to be the resource piece. So if you are thinking that, gosh, maybe I do, or maybe a family member does, or maybe a child does, come to that so that we can give you resources. You can learn a little bit more, educate yourself to it. If you are an educator, this will be a perfect thing for you to come to so that you have an idea of what to look for and what this is. And maybe there's things that you can do different when you're building classes online or building classes or things in the classroom that can help all of the children. Because again, 1 in 5 people have dyslexia. That's a huge number. So chances are, if you're an educator right now, there's somebody sitting in your class. There's probably multiple people sitting in your class that have dyslexia. So yes, make sure you join us. Super excited about this episode.
I am so looking forward to having Joy on. And Pam, I appreciate you so much for sharing your story.
Absolutely.
I have learned quite a bit, so much more about dyslexia than I knew previously. And as I mentioned, girl, you're dyslexic. So here's where we started.
Awesome.
Exactly. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Reignite Resilience. We will see you in the next couple of days with the next episode with Joy, and giving you tools and resources to support the journey of dyslexia if you're on that, or to help you in identifying it for yourself, for people in your lives. Those are important to you, those that you love. So join us next time. We look forward to seeing you soon.
And if you guys found this episode valuable, please share it on your social media. Go to our Facebook page, Reignite Resilience. Share your stories. If maybe you or somebody that you love has dyslexia, share your stories with us, or private message Natalie and I, and we would happily share your story. So until next time, guys, thanks so much for coming and supporting us and creating this community that we're so passionate about. Till next time.
Till next time. Bye, guys. Thank you for joining us today. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with others who are seeking to reignite their resilience. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we'll continue to explore the remarkable power of resilience. Until next time, keep the fire of resilience burning bright in your hearts. Bye, guys.